Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another one of the Salt Lake Chamber's candidate forums. Today, we're going to be focusing on Utah's first congressional district. This is one of our series of candidate forums. We've got two more after this one. We hope you'll join us. You can find all the details on our website at slchamber.com. My name is Jonathan Hafen. I'm on the Chamber's board, and I'm an attorney at Parr, Brown, Gee & Lovelace. I am joined today by my co-host, Ali Isom, who is a Vice President and Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer for Clyde Companies. She also is a co-chair of the Chamber's Public Policy Committee. We are streaming live today from the Chamber's offices.
Thanks, Jonathan. And our forum will focus on issues that are important to Utah's business community. Each candidate will have approximately 30 minutes to answer questions, and the number of questions each candidate can answer will depend on the length of their responses. Without further delay, let me introduce our first candidate today. We please welcome Congressman Blake Moore, the Republican incumbent candidate for Congressional District 1. Congressman, could you begin by telling our viewers about yourself and why are you running for re-election?
Thank you. Thanks, Ali and Jonathan. Host of the Salt Lake Chamber. Any chance I get to interact with this group of people and your stakeholders is a good day in Congress, because you're talking about substantive issues that matter to virtually every American, because it matters to making sure we have strong economic growth. And I think we're going to get a chance to talk about that. I got into this, I wasn't in politics, and I decided to run for Congress 4 years ago. And I remember trying to articulate what are the things that are going to kind of drive me. And the things that I have started with, that I've been able to keep a consistent theme on, is reversing debt culture in Washington, D.C., supporting our defense, and particularly the Hill Air Force Base community. It's such an integral part of the first district and has been for decades. And the third is making sure that there's a strong, sort of optimistic conservative voice for the next generation. We're losing that, and we need to be able to do that. And although I don't fill a day over 60 in this job, after having been there, I felt like I was at least a voice for a trending younger voice within at least the Republican Party. And so we've been able to have a significant amount of success legislatively. My first term, I was able to pass actual bills that were signed into law. Not just messaging bills, not just it sounds good when you tweet about this or that, but actual bills that were signed into law that affected the Great Salt Lake, so our cybercrimes metrics, things of course related to our defense community and the like. And so, and then with my second term, I got on the committee that is of utmost importance, particularly with where we're going next, which I think a lot of our conversation will revolve around. But getting on the Ways and Means Committee is directly related to tax, trade, healthcare, Social Security, and welfare. And if you want to talk about where our debt comes from and why Congress functions the way that it doesn't allow us to actually address these issues, this is the committee that you can actually do something about this on. And so I'm hopeful, as I've gotten on that committee this term, to look forward going forward. The most important thing, I think, as I'll wrap up, next year, the end of 2025, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was signed into law in 2017, the majority of those provisions expire. And we have got 1 year to be able to figure out what that looks like going forward. Because if we do nothing, there will be a $4.3 trillion tax increase on the American people and our workers starting at 2026. So we've got a year to figure out what that tax environment looks like going forward, and to make sure that we still maintain positive economic growth. And that's really at the heart of what I want to do back there.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And that's a perfect segue to what we want to talk about first as far as an issue, and that's tax policy. You've outlined what's going to be happening at the end of next year. I know that it's we don't know yet who's going to be controlling the House or the Senate, or who's going to be sitting in the chair in the White House. Yeah. But let's pretend like you have a magic wand on tax policy. What do you think the federal government should do from a tax policy standpoint that will make things better, particularly for Utah businesses? That's our audience today.
The number one thing that businesses, executives, CEOs, workers, what they need is a predictable environment for the next 10 to 15 beyond. The constant threat of this changing every 2 years is one of the most difficult things for companies to deal with. So consistency is the first thing that we need to be able to provide them. Now, 2017 till the end of 25, that did provide almost a decade's worth of consistency and a roadmap on where you can invest and make sure that you have the right strategy in place for your company. We need to be able to make that look further out. So ideally, with my magic wand, we would be able to redo a lot of what we did in 2017. And we're currently working as a committee to identify what has worked, what hasn't been that influential, because it might be areas that we can jettison, and where we need to think of new potential ideas. Largely, what we're hearing from the entire business community is that the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act worked. It created a competitive tax environment that has allowed us to do two things: stay competitive with the international community, but also bring a lot of that intellectual property and a lot of that operational piece back into the U.S. side, and therefore we're not paying taxes. Companies aren't paying taxes to, say, Ireland when they've got now a competitive rate here. They're now paying taxes to the U.S. So people have to answer one question. Okay, the taxes are going to get paid. They might move them overseas and pay a little bit less, or would you want to make that a competitive environment here and have that tax bill paid here? Our revenue went up after 2017 tax. We cut the corporate tax rate from 38 to 21. We broadened the base, and our revenue actually went up. Economic growth continued to go in the positive direction. We need to make sure that we repeat that as much as possible. And all these provisions that are going to expire, we want to be able to either make permanent or set them out for a distance of at least 10 years out.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, to follow up on that, the fact that you're being sensitive to what's happening to everyday Utahns is terrific, but we all are facing growing population, rising housing costs, and I'm wondering how you see the federal government addressing housing and the affordable housing crisis that's right now happening in the state of Utah.
So the easiest thing for any federal level and politician to say is, well, it's a state's issue. So it's a state's issue, but I do want to add a substantive piece about what we can do federally. There's been a unique unicorn in Congress right now. It's called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. And so LIHTC for short. LIHTC has been extremely bipartisan and very effective, and you can look at the outcomes of it. We need to continue on with those programs. You can look at that and determine, okay, maybe there's areas to enhance it. We could increase the quotas in certain, for each state, maybe. That's another thing we could look at. But in the most recent tax bill this year, it was my Republican colleague from Oklahoma on the committee with me. I remember him speaking up in the lunch saying, Chairman, we're not doing enough on low-income housing tax credit on this tax bill. Chairman went back to the Democrat chairman of the Finance Committee on the Senate side, Senator Wyden, and went back and negotiated more. Republicans led the charge. We knew the Democrats supported it, and we led the charge to include more of LIHTC in that tax bill that we did this last year. So LIHTC has been very successful. You can go to each community and find areas that it's been working. It creates an incentive to invest, to develop, and the ultimate outcome is that people have better housing options and they pay less. And it's still not just a subsidized market, it's just a tax incentivized market for everybody to benefit. There's still yields. But you know what, a lot of developers, a lot of investors, they will take a 12% yield as opposed to maybe 20 that they could go get somewhere else because they know they're doing something good for the community. And that's something that's incredibly positive, and I think you're seeing it a lot in Utah, but you see it across the country. Why would we not want to promote more of that? These investors could go elsewhere for their investment, but we want them involved in building the community and making it safer and more housing options, and that's happening. So that's the thing that you do at the federal level. We also have a bill that would increase the activity of doing this type of investment near military bases. Hill Air Force Base is important to me. The mayor of Clearfield came to me and said, hey, I have an idea. You're getting onto Ways and Means. That's awesome. We've never had a Utah Republican on Ways and Means. I think it was like in the 60s that there was one term Democrat that did it. This is an idea I've had brewing for a while. Why not increase the ability to use the low-income housing tax credit around the military bases and get more supply, if you will, because it's a supply issue, right? We ran with that idea. We spent about 12 to 14 months vetting it, running it through all the scoring mechanisms. This isn't just if you have an idea and you go to take it to the ledger and you introduce the bill and you tweet about it, That's a messaging bill. But if you go and actually run it through committee and make sure that there might be a potential for this to actually play out, that's a more substantive bill, and we did that. And I give all the credit to Mayor Shepherd. It was an awesome experience for me to go work with a gentleman that we ran against each other in the first election. And a year or so later, we got this great relationship, and he comes to me with this idea that actually might have legs here. So that's another case that can help directly with our communities. Just in general, though, folks, there are market-based opportunities here, the likes of which we haven't seen before. There's companies, there's organizations like Homeo that take place. Former state legislator Steve Waldrop, he's got a very similar model that incorporates investment into individuals being able to purchase homes. Right, and so I might only have 5%. Newly graduated, working my first job, I might only have 5% of a down payment to buy into a condo. Well, you could actually aggregate some institutional investors through an organization that would help do this work. They go in and they actually own a portion of your home. You own a portion of it, and over the next 10 years, they get bought out. You continue on with your ownership. You've had a lower mortgage, and you've been able to get into that with that access to capital. That is far better than Vice President Harris saying, I'm just going to do $25,000 credit tax incentive to new home buyers. Well, guess what? When we do that, then the housing prices are going to go up 25%. So if you give $25,000, she's going to do it at a dollar figure. You do $25,000 and just give it away of money we don't have at the federal government to just give away for this situation. Why not take a market-based approach that can incorporate principles that are actually they're sustainable, and it's not just like a $25,000 one-time scenario that ultimately causes inflation and actually probably increases home prices on the back end. That's the kind of policies that should be driving. So a portion of it's federal legislative work, and a portion of it's just letting the market do what it's supposed to do. And then at some point we need to get out of the way and make sure that our HUD, all of the regulations within HUD, allow for more market-based options.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your response.
So at lunch today, my law firm had a meeting, and during that meeting, we were talking about rising healthcare costs. It's just crazy what's happening. We have that meeting every year. I know it's the same kind of meeting that other businesses throughout the state are having. What do we do about our healthcare costs?
Yeah, when I was at Cicero Group, I remember them sitting us down each year and just saying, this is what it's gone up to this year. Yeah. We would have our broker come in and explain everything to us and try to get the best deal that you possibly can. So ultimately,
so what do we do?
What do we do? So this year we passed a very bipartisan bill called the Lower Cost, More Transparency Act. It incorporates, the way I want to communicate this isn't going to be specific in nature, but why are we constantly talking about healthcare and not talking about car insurance? Why are we constantly talking about healthcare and not talking about, the costs of other things in our economy? It's because we do not have competition, transparency, and the ability for consumers to be empowered like they are with other types of markets within our society. Now, part of it is because you might be in an accident that you're incapacitated and you got to get in the ambulance and you got to go where's the best place to go. But the bill that we did this year is requiring people to post their prices, the cost of a certain type of health care. It requires PBMs to post what their rebates actually cost, where the money's ultimately going. Insurance companies are having to be held accountable to just being ultimately more transparent. If you create a culture that has transparency, you will automatically see more competition come. And when what competition ultimately does is drive prices down because consumers are empowered. People still make money, but prices ultimately sort of come down. We don't have that. Our healthcare market I don't know the best word for it, but it just doesn't mimic what a natural market should ultimately do. Our government has become so involved in this. There's ideas like Sidecar Health, great organizations that work with providers to be able to provide this. We have a ton of glut in the middleman world. So you have, like in the drug manufacturing, you have the drug manufacturers, then you have the pharmacies and the ultimate consumers, but just getting it to the places that it all exists to, there's an enormous amount of churn that isn't necessarily providing a lot of value to the entire to the entire system. You have to target that and try to limit that as much as you possibly can. And there's a ton of work that's going on. This doesn't happen overnight, but there's a strong recollection that anything we've done, whether it be Obamacare, all the Medicare, Medicaid, all the different programs that the government gets heavily involved in, we just finance it through a different way. It doesn't actually deal with the core issue of costs of healthcare to lower those down. It's just like it gets another group to pay for it, and then it'll finance it through a different group, and then another group will pay for it. Unless you were willing to do that type of transparency competition, then you really aren't going to have much of a chance to do it. And we're in Congress, in a very bipartisan way, is trying to tackle as much of that as possible.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting.
Yeah.
We recognize none of these issues are small. For the Salt Lake Chamber, a bulk of our membership are these small businesses that are the backbone of our economy and of our community. So, Congressman, can you share with us how you have advocated for Utah's small businesses, or for what you might advocate in the future for Utah's small businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's two really important principles within the tax world that goes through Ways and Means that directly affects small businesses. And if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. So whether you're a West Virginia small business or Utah small business, that's primarily the world I live in, and I want to make it a good environment for everybody, right? And so it's called the Small Business Growth Act. In 2017, we increased the amount you could expense from a capital expenditure. Say you're a manufacturing facility. Let's say you're a small manufacturing facility, and you go and buy a $750,000 piece of equipment, which is right in line with what a lot of this equipment costs. Before 2017, you were only able to expense $500,000 of that. After 2017, you could expense all $750,000. You could expense up to $1 million. So we're looking at, that was in 2017. It's 2024. Me and my team, we put forward the Small Business Growth Act, which increases that to $1.29 million. Okay, we need to continue to make it so companies want to invest in themselves. They want to buy the capital needed to do their job more effectively. And so if you give them an expensing option, guess what? They're going to be more apt to go and buy that good piece of equipment that helps them do their business. Well, what happens? It's like, oh, well then, great, they write that off, they're not paying taxes on it. Yes, but you just sold, something just sold, a transaction just happened, and that person made income. They're going to be paid some taxes on that. You're still going to be paying your own taxes. The more activity you create in our economy, the more our actual revenue can still go up. So it's not about just ruining revenue. The more activity, the more economic opportunities you create, the more revenue you're able to do. That passed with flying colors, and the Senate blocked it. I don't want to get into that. Everybody at the Salt Lake Chamber knows how frustrated I am at that, because I've talked about it many, many times. But it is what it is. It moved up from $1 million to 1.29. The second piece that's key, and I'll be very brief about this, but I'm happy to go into more details, is Section 199A. So that's a part of the 2017 tax cuts. So any type of small business or a pass-through entity, right? Say you're an accountant, and you set up an LLC or a sole proprietorship. Like, we made it so that there was a 20% deduction in your revenue that you don't have an incredibly high tax burden. You're able to get some tax relief. Why? Because we moved the corporate tax rate down, and we didn't have anything that was necessarily hitting small businesses per se. I say we, I wasn't in Congress then, but Republicans did the 2017 tax cuts. They used 179 or 199A to also lower tax burden for small businesses. That's a 20% deduction that you're able to take to make sure that you keep more of what you make and be able to spend that and invest that in better ways, instead of just kind of giving it to a federal government that is so stuck in bad operation and putting good money after bad, right? What we've seen from that is strong economic growth, increased revenues. So the whole concept, and I have a Democratic challenger. His party literally tries to say that the Tax Cut and Jobs Act is the reason we're in so much debt. The reason we're in so much debt is because we have high expenditures and we won't deal with that. Republicans didn't deal with it in 2017. Democrats have no interest in dealing with it. we might have a chance to deal with it next year, and hopefully we do. But it's not raising taxes to pay for our expenses. If we raise taxes, our economic output drops. Then we don't have the revenue that comes from it. We had increased revenue even though we were lowering taxes. Utah sees it all the time. We create a business environment where people want to invest. We're still raising our revenues. Revenues are still being increased, but we're limiting the individual tax burden on people. So 199A is key, and that all expires next year. And that will be probably one of the most hotly contested aspects because that expires and the corporate tax rate doesn't. So from 35 to 21 stays permanent, but the 199A bumps back up and you no longer have a 20% deduction. That's going to hit a lot of small businesses if we don't get something done on it. I've co-sponsored Lloyd Smucker's bill that would make that permanent, and I think it's a very, very important piece that we need to do, and hopefully we can get it done.
Sounds like a big to-do list, but thank you.
Huge to-do list.
Yeah, thank you.
So that whole entire tax bill, everything that expires is significant, and we've got to be working on it hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll see the return of some bipartisanship. I know that's important to you. Do you ever see that happening again in your lifetime?
So, privately, Democrats will say, okay, the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act wasn't as bad as we make it out to be. But we like to stand up and say this is just a tax benefit for the wealthy. It's disingenuous, but it's politics, right? And so you just have to learn to navigate it. That actually did more for lower and middle income Americans than it did for than wealthy Americans by significantly. And talk about that data all we want. But no Democrats were willing to support it. Next year, if the political winds line up that there's a White House, House, and Senate under Republican control, we're going to do a couple of bills that are highly partisan. And they're going to be a tax bill, and they're going to be hopefully a deficit reducer, mandatory spending reduction, right? Just to take a look at our overall expenditures and find out where in $6.5 trillion can we cut some money, right? President Biden was willing to do a little bit on the appropriations side, and credit to him for Republicans were like, we are going to demand cuts to non-defense discretionary, and we were able to accomplish that. We need to do even more, especially if we have the White House, House, and Senate, and truly be the fiscal conservatives that most of us claim to be. We have an opportunity to do that if we get that. Because we get a chance to do a bill once a year that is party line only. You bypass the filibuster and you do it, but it has to be budget related. And that's something you will see play out. If we're in split government, we'll probably be haggling over a tax bill for the majority of the year, get the appropriations process done, and you're not going to be able to find many opportunities for massive or noteworthy spending cuts. But if we have the White House, House, and Senate, we should be able to do that. There's a lot of opportunity for bipartisanship. Like I said, this tax bill this year, incredibly bipartisan. Democrats wanted a lot more out of the child tax credit. Republicans did that. I think we did it very responsibly. There was a little bit of give and take with that, but it largely lined up with what Trump had done in 2017. And then we got a whole bunch of really important provisions like R&D, interest deductibility, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of opportunity for bipartisanship. And if you're in split government, they will be forced to do something tax-wise. Other than that, let's let the states deal with more of this than the federal government. We just find areas of cut.
Well, let me follow up with one more economic question, if that's okay. So,
what about you makes me think that's not okay? I'm a big fan of economic questions.
That is true. You talk about 199, everything else, you're loaded and ready to go, which we love. That's why we love having these candidate forums. We learn so much from you. We really appreciate you being here. So Utah has got this rock and roll economy. I mean, we're doing phenomenally well. So this is Utah economy focused question. What can happen at the federal government, in your view, to help Utah continue to enjoy this historic economic growth?
We need to keep inflation under check. Because I will sympathize with a lot of my first district residents that even though unemployment is low, even though wages may be good, maybe companies are still coming here and job growth is still strong, they're losing about a month's worth of income off of inflation. And so here's one thing I'm really proud that we've been able to do. So President Biden, I don't think he was expecting to get the White House, House, and Senate, because in November 2020, the Georgia senators, both of them, won that night. But because of their election law, they triggered a runoff. And during those 2 months, there was a lot of turmoil going on. And, you saw Republicans not be willing to show up and vote. Sometimes they were told not to. When that happened, the Republicans lost. So a month later, President Biden's like, okay, brand new president. All of a sudden, I got the Senate in Democrat control, and I wasn't expecting that. The House lost a lot of seats, but Speaker Pelosi's still in control. We can do one really big bill. And they did a $2 trillion bill called the American Rescue Plan. They masqueraded it as COVID relief. It was a high spend inflationary bill. And that's not me saying it. That's Larry Summers, right? The economist for Clinton and Obama. That bill created an enormous amount of inflation. Now, the supply chain was tough. I get it. We're coming out of COVID. There was always going to be a little uptick, but with gas prices where they were, and the inflation was insane. So President Biden spent over $5 trillion net new dollars, not the annual appropriations process that we do every year. He spent an additional $5 trillion net new dollars in his first 2 years in office because he had the White House, House, and Senate. We won back the majority in the House with a tiny, tiny margin. And obviously it's been tough to govern, and we have a lot of infighting. You saw, just even getting a speaker was a complete disaster, right? But what we've done is we've kept monetary supply as low as you possibly can. We've done one foreign aid bill and just the annual appropriations, of which we actually trimmed about $100 billion of spending. So we've been very, very fiscally responsible with a tiny majority, keeping all of President Biden's everything he wants to spend on completely at bay. Now, what are the two ways to deal with inflation? You increase rates, you increase interest rates, which the Fed has been doing, and you decrease monetary supply. Well, Republicans in control of one house of Congress is doing everything we can to control the monetary supply, and you're seeing the inflation numbers tick down. It's partly because of interest rates, but it's also because we're not just adding a bunch of relief spending, which puts a bunch of money in the system and too few goods, which is what inflation does. That's what Utahns need. We need to cut out inflationary type of bills that go directly to their paycheck every single month. Our economy will exist. We're very dynamic, and we mimic the U.S. economy. We have manufacturing, we have defense, we have tourism, we have a strong financial services market, agriculture. We have got a really unique economy that can survive if we just don't keep doing stupid things in Washington. And I'm hoping that Republicans, if we get back in the control of the Senate, can do more than just block a bunch of bad spending and actually put forward some true spending cuts that can be substantive.
Thank you.
We're down to our last question, Congressman, and it's to address workforce issues. You're well aware that Utah employers and businesses face significant workforce challenges, both in skills gaps and in readiness. So how do you plan to address those kinds of challenges at the national level for Utah?
Right, we have a lot of things within, the Department of Labor under a Democrat administration will get a little bit, they'll be a little bit overreaching. You have threats of too much of the labor union aspect of it. Now, I'm saying that while the head of the Teamsters actually spoke at the RNC, so the irony is not lost on me. We need to be able to embrace the workforce of America and look at labor unions and say, you need to change some of your ways. Look at these states that operate. Our workers are treated well. Our workers are given wage increases, they're given opportunities. We can't continue to use these archaic types of regulations that stymie the ability for an employee and employer to live out the American dream, right? So we need to be able to put that type of stuff in check. The PRO Act has to be dead in the water. It was very tense that it was going to see the light of day when there was White House, House, and Senate under Democrat control. We've been able to keep that completely at bay, but it's got to go away. We got to move past that type of stuff. We need to fix our immigration policy. I would just say, look at Salt Lake Chamber's Compact on Immigration. It's an exceptional framework that we need to be able to match and do at the federal level. There is bills out there that would do all we needed to do on border security, making sure that we have the right type of asylum processes in place that don't incentivize the cartels to continue to run the border like they're running it now, but also encourage good workforce that comes and people that want to come here and work. Like, it's been a part of our fabric of our country for its entirety, and we need to be able to embrace that. That's been 30, 40 years that Congress keeps saying that, but they don't. We cannot let just a few voices here or there control that, and we've got to be able to come and get a good, solid immigration proposal together. And I sincerely do love the Salt Lake Chamber's Compact on Immigration. It is exactly the type of approach we need to look forward.
Okay. Thank you so much. We appreciate your response here and your time with us today. Is there anything else we need to cover, Jonathan?
I think we've hit it. Any last things that you want to share with the business community before we wrap up this session with you?
No, I'll just add, pay attention to what's going on in the tax and regulatory environment. There's one extra piece that is really, really unique that we haven't been able to deal with in 40 years, and that's the Supreme Court ruling on the Chevron deference. So Chevron, essentially, when that was ruled on 40 years ago, it said if Congress hasn't exactly communicated what to do, we're going to let the executive branch step in. Now that has been overturned. And so it's basically saying that the executive branch should have less power to be able to create a regulatory environment. There's two things that need to happen. Congress needs to get this act together and pass bills that can actually be signed into law. And that requires a filibuster-proof a majority. It has to be able to get past 60 votes in the Senate. It's easy to pass a bill in the House. Whoever's in charge can pass a bill. It's a messaging bill, and it goes nowhere in the Senate. We have to be willing to say, all right, we as a body of Congress can do better than either president of Republican or Democrat Party on regulatory environment for the financial services industry or agriculture or something like trade issues. Congress needs to be able to do its job. And the second piece is you'll probably have the courts step in a lot more here, and I think there's an important aspect there. So for the business community, watch what's going on with Chevron. See if there's any way to be involved and provide input and data to help that work go forward. The executive branch has grown wildly out of control for whoever's in the White House, and we need to, as Congress, need to be able to take that back. Chevron is our first chance to do it. And then, of course, the tax negotiations that will be going on over the next year and a half are going to be very important for the business community to be involved.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Love hearing your perspective. That'll end our session with you. Let everybody else know we're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be back with our next candidate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Now, please welcome Bill Campbell, the Democratic contender for Congressional District 1. Bill, we're glad to have you. And could you just begin today by telling our viewers about yourself and what exactly inspired you to run again for Congress?
Yes. First, Ali, thank you for the opportunity. Jonathan and the entire support team, very appreciative for this opportunity. Yes, I've been in business the majority of my life. I started KPMG as a CPA, went to work for Autoleaf for over 30 years, and been very active in the chambers of commerce, here in Salt Lake, Davis, Weber, and up in Cache. It's a very positive environment on the business side. So I had a very successful business career, but I was concerned what was happening at a national level to persons' lives that were negatively impacting the future. And that's what motivated me the most, that we needed to change it, needed to give back for our children and our grandchildren, because I was afraid that we're proceeding in dangerous, potentially destructive directions, and that I had the skills and the capabilities to change that.
Okay. Well, thank you. We appreciate you jumping into the race. And Jonathan and I will take some turns asking you questions.
Okay.
So maybe this one will be easy for you since you have a KPMG background. But the first question is about tax policy. And that's a tough one. We've got some tax cuts that are scheduled to expire next year, as I'm sure you're aware. But I'm going to give you a magic wand, and you get to do whatever you want with tax policy at a federal level to make things better for all Americans. What would you do?
Yes, obviously tax policy is critical. First and foremost, though, I don't believe the federal tax policy impacts businesses directly here. Because again, working for Autoleaf, we went from under 50 persons to over 10,000 at the peak, not because of the federal tax policies. It was because of the excellent leaders. It was the continuous improvement. environment. It was a high talented, high value workforce with an outstanding state culture. And again, natural resources, it's quality of life. So part of my objective would be to reduce the federal involvement at the local level. Specifically with regards to the policy, I think the government being less involved means that we would simplify the tax code. So I would keep all the rates exactly where they were, both on the corporate and the individual side. I would remove earmarks, and I would remove all of the special interest, tax deductions, and credits, because I believe those are unduly profiting and benefiting special interests, multinational corps, and not the mom and pop businesses, not the small businesses that are the backbone for Utah's economy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And our next question asks, with the growing population and rising housing costs, how do you see the federal government addressing the affordable housing crisis we face here in the state of Utah?
Yes, thanks, Alex. I do believe it's a crisis, not just on the affordable housing and the purchase, but even the home maintenance and continuing ownership, with the property taxes, with the utility costs, with the maintenance. And even since we're talking about chamber business, small businesses, their rent prices going up and maintaining the buildings that they're in. So allow me to group it up all into one. Yes, we need to improve that. We need to do it in a responsible way by looking at a longer-term strategic basis and freeing up more land and space for their ability. Where I differ from my opponent, though, I want to preserve the open federal land. I want to preserve the open spaces. I believe, like Salt Lake City, we need to grow more vertically, and for the less aesthetic places, parking lots, storage locations, perhaps find ways to move those underground like a lot of other cities have.
Okay.
So along those lines, one of my other concerns with regards to housing is we get in a situation where the individuals cannot compete against the large corporations. There's corporations that have lower borrowing costs, so they can come in and it's hard for an individual to compete against them, which effectively winds up driving up prices.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate that.
So now we've got another question about life getting more expensive. So we've talked about housing. One of the other biggies is healthcare. This is a big deal to Utah's businesses. What's your view on how we can combat the rising healthcare costs?
Healthcare inflation has been going up dramatically, and we definitely need to slow that. The biggest differential between myself and my opponent is the negotiation off the terms. I do not have any special interests, where my opponent does have pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies as major donors, and PACs that are supporting his campaign. I personally believe we need to take away their influence from the process and allow the government to negotiate those prices. As an example, I do not believe in price controls, but when we take away somebody's ability to negotiate it, you're effectively pushing a price control, but you're giving it to the supplier as opposed to having an equal bargaining arm's length transaction. So the first part of the answer is yes, open negotiations, market pricing for everything. The second, I would advocate for more preventive medicine along those lines. We need to have more preventive and advanced care, because if we don't have timely responses, we don't have the proper care, the costs build up as the severity, injury, or illness progresses. And there's been a lot of exciting developments in terms of technology. We can talk about AI, wearable devices, telehealth, but the better we can take advantage of those new technologies, it can help reduce the cost and improve service for everyone, including the rural communities.
Thank you.
Bill, earlier you mentioned that small business is the backbone of the economy, and we couldn't agree more. So we're curious, what will you advocate in your term as congressman in terms of small business? How will you help them most?
Yes, the small businesses just need a fair chance because they can best respond to the local customer and the local environment and preferences. The biggest thing they have against them right now is the tax code, and what's happening at a federal level creates an unfair advantage. Because right now, for instance, a lot of the large government incentives, some of which advocated by my opponent, they're preferencing the large multinational corporations, not the small local mom and pop businesses. So if we take those off and create a fair local playing field, it makes it a lot easier and a lot better for everyone. I was at an event just a couple days ago. It was the Ogden-Weber Crossroads event at Union Station. And at that event, it was great awareness for all the local businesses that we have. And I consider myself very involved in the community, but over half the businesses I did not know about. So if we can increase the awareness and support buy local campaigns, and we can highlight the great businesses run in our industry, in our communities, I think everyone would profit and it would definitely help the small business owner. If I can give a shout out, persons like Tim Roper do the same thing for the Davis County Chamber of Commerce. You do the networking, you publicize the business, and it lets the community know that you have great viable options just next door that impact your neighbors.
Yeah, we do have some great businesses here in Utah. Thank you. Jonathan?
Let's stick with the economy. We've talked about small businesses. Now let's talk about the economy and economic growth generally. Utah, rocket ship of an economy right now. We've got tremendous momentum. People are looking to Utah, to the Salt Lake Chamber. How are you doing what you're doing out there in Utah? How do we keep that going? What's the role of the federal government, if any, in helping Utah continue with this momentum?
Well, again, I'd like to go back to my prior comment. I would try to decrease the role of the federal government. Our state legislators doing a fantastic job of creating a business-friendly environment. And I believe our high talented, high value workforce and the great work-life balance that we have in the community, high ethical workers too, which I think is becoming more and more critical in today's environment, but they sell themselves. We don't need the government to get involved because unfortunately, Utah represents about 1% of the nation, a little more than 3 million persons, over 300 million nationally. So we only have 1% interest at DC if we try to do things at a federal level. And respectfully, California has 9 times the power that we have, the political power with the influence, with regards to DC. So I would much rather create a fair, neutral playing ground where we can show all of the positives that we have here in Utah and put that on the table for new businesses, as opposed to putting it up to DC and the legislators that are controlled by states like California.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next question tackles workforce issues. As you know, in Utah, our businesses are facing significant workforce issues in terms of skill gaps and readiness for employment. What do you think can be done at the federal level to help Utah with our workforce needs?
This is an excellent question. Again, living so close to Hill Air Force Base, where again, my neighbors, friends, and other family members actually support the Air Force community, that's critical, but we can't be responding to that today. We need to work on a more strategic basis. And as you referenced the skill gaps, for an example, we need to identify what skills we need 5, 10 years from now. And we need to start having the education systems, the training and support for those skills and not try to address today's issues with whatever resources may have been provided in the past. And perhaps I'm aging myself, but I remember going to elementary school and learning how to write cursive and taking a class in typewriting skills.
You are old-fashioned.
Guilty as charged. But that's an example that those skills aren't as relevant now. And if we can identify what's relevant in the future, especially with AI and how AI can supplement people's productivity, and rather than replace jobs, it can enhance our quality of living. That's what we should be training our workforce for, and getting our kids more and more involved in those opportunities. And I think the more we can collaborate between the government roles, the education systems, the local communities, and the business, I think we can best come up with a coordinated plan to identify long-term what we need so we can help fill those gaps. And quite frankly, being involved at each of those levels, I can believe I can properly represent them and bring forth the best solutions.
Okay, thank you.
So next question, and I guess all my questions are about things getting more expensive. Childcare. You've talked about work-life balance. Childcare is a big piece of that. It's, I mean, what I'm hearing, I'm sure what you've heard is childcare is just way too expensive. And I think I may know where you're headed with this based on previous answers about how we address rising costs. But what should be done, if anything, at the federal level to help address rising childcare costs?
Yeah, my response may be a little predicted, but unfortunately, I believe it does need to be resolved local. Federal government should play a role, but a very limited role, and it should be on the individual choice. But I firmly believe we need to advocate family-friendly policies and create an environment in which that's possible. The question is, who has the lead? And all too often, we have great solutions on a local basis in terms of business providing on-site childcare, or schools having opening hours or opportunities for the students to stay late for the parents. those are the best solutions when they're local and they can address the individual needs. I'm afraid all too often if the federal government gets involved, and respectfully, when they try to come up with one solution that's the best for all 50 states, all 330 Americans, it's difficult. But if we can respond to the child care opportunities locally, I believe that would be best. And as part of the tax code that we referenced earlier, I would be very strongly supportive of expanding the credits for those.
Thank you.
Mr. Campbell, I expect you're traveling a bit in your new role as a candidate, and you've seen some of the state and our communities in new ways. But the things that connect our communities is infrastructure. So when we think about our future infrastructure needs in Utah, how will you prioritize, especially as we begin to expand or continue expanding, how will you prioritize our infrastructure needs in Washington, D.C.?
I believe the infrastructure is critical because if done properly and in a non-biased process, it can help everyone involved by easing the transportation and actually helping some of the climate and the other concerns along those lines by stopping the congestion we all experience on I-15. The public transportation, for instance, and some of the green energy solutions. If we develop better infrastructure, I think that's critical. And if I can give another shout out, gentleman Bob McEntee talks about the smart grid, for instance. We definitely need to replace and upgrade our grid system. We need to better protect it, and we need to make it stronger. We need to have a way that once we can generate the green energy, like at the hydrogen plant that we're putting up here in the state, or some of the solar capabilities we have, some way to feed it into the system with a strong grid that whether or not we don't have the hurricanes they have in Florida, fortunately, but whether or not there's an earthquake or some other event, that we still have the electricity, we still have the way to carry on our way of life. So strengthening the grid, in my opinion, would be one of the key infrastructure items, but that would be something I would support as opposed to my opponent voted against the Infrastructure Act that was recently passed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Let me ask you a question about technology and innovation. We are seeing a lot of growth in that area here in Utah. What are your views on technology, supporting startups? How can we keep that momentum going here in Utah?
Yes, we definitely should, because again, the entrepreneur spirit and some of the creativity we have here is magnificent. Utah is becoming one of the hubs with regards to AI and some of the other exciting technologies. And some of the things we've done, for instance, the U-STAR program, the Utah Science, Technology, and Research, that we have right down the street here at Hill. And I was working on part of the Innovation Campus up in Logan. And I know Falcon Hill right there in Clearfield is part of it as well. If we support that with some of the new engineering ideas and the great future technologies, whether or not it's AI, whether or not it's in medical, bioscience, or natural sciences, or energy, we have some young, brilliant minds that we just need a way to feed that energy and those ideas through. So I would definitely support those activities, and I think what the Utah State Legislature had done with U-STAR is an excellent example that's already working in several locations.
Thank you.
Mr. Campbell, our businesses in Utah are facing increasing pressure to adopt sustainable practices. And there are many different ways to get to sustainability, but what federal incentives would you prioritize to make sure that Utah companies can effectively transition to greener operations and a greener future?
Yes, I've always been under the belief along those lines, we need to make it as easy as possible for people to do the right thing. So at the end of the day, if I just use myself on a personal basis, when we're sitting at the home consuming any electricity or any power, I don't want to have to make major decisions and major adjustments in terms of the energy source. It would be great if that system was already fed in, like I referenced the hydrogen source that's going in there, some of the green energy, if we already had that fed in through the electrical grid. So I would support those individual items, and on a sustainable basis, I believe that's the best way is to have it fully integrated into the grid so most of the activities are transparent for everyone. They could just go about their regular life and doing the simple, easy thing, actually promote some of the green technologies. And if I can give an example, because this is when it's done local, and I think a little peer pressure actually helps. I remember at Autoleaf, it was Earth Day. We're handing out reusable bags. And quite frankly, at that point, I wasn't using reusable bags very often. but I was kind of pressured from a couple colleagues to start using one and going to the store. So I walked into Smith's, used the reusable bag, and there was this kid, it was about a 14 or 15-year-old boy that came out afterwards and just said, "Thank you, I appreciate you caring." And I had never really done that. That was the first time. But having a kid come up to us and just give a compliment, said, "Thanks for caring about the environment." I was kind of guilt conscious. I started to use it even more. But that's how, without insulting, without being critical, companies like Autoleaf, when you provide on Earth Day something like a reusable bag to prevent the plastics from going in there, and when you give somebody a simple compliment that says if you go to Starbucks and you see somebody using a refillable container as opposed to the plastic cup, just thank the person for caring about the environment. It doesn't cost anything, and it promotes the right things on a positive basis. So I think those are better ways to promote sustainable solutions.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Okay, we've got one more substantive question, and then Allie will give you a chance to wrap up. And you've already touched on it, and that's work-life balance. Utah's viewed as a family-friendly state, and I'm curious, you've talked about tax policy, and I'm interested in your view on, for example, child care credits with respect to the number of dependents a family has. What role should the federal government have, whether it's tax policy or anything else, to help Utahns have more work-life balance?
Yes. And again, as I stated, fully supportive of extending the child tax credits. So I think that should be part of the policy, as well as tax simplification, because I believe it's overly complicated, and supportive of special interests versus small businesses and families. So with regards to expanding that out in the work-life balance, yeah, we're blessed to live so close to so many national parks that people from all over the world want to come to. And they're in our backyard. And I think that's part of the lure that we have here. So to the extent we can make it more convenient, and to the extent we can promote those activities and make it easier for persons, I believe it serves in everyone's best interest. I personally, after a long day, if it's been stressful, just love going on a hike and through the trail and on any of the Wasatch trails. And it rejuvenates my spirit and it refreshes my mind but it has those positive effects. And I think we need to recognize that's vital for our future as well. So yes, work-life balance is critical. I wouldn't have the federal government mandate it on businesses. I would just try to encourage businesses to adopt it. And we just try to preserve the majesty that we have in nature here.
Thank you.
Bill, with the last few remaining minutes that we have, what else would you like Utahns to know about you and your candidacy? What do Utah's businesses need to be more aware of in terms of your platform and your direction as a potential congressman?
Yes, thank you, Allie. I believe the biggest distinction between myself and my opponent is my opponent is a good man, but most of his background has basically been in government-funded roles. A good job, but that's the perspective he has. I grew up in the private sector. After school, went for KPMG as a CPA, went to work for Autoleaf, ended up being the CFO for over 20 years, got my MBA from Utah State. But I've always been on the private side and the business side, and now very active in the chambers of commerce. Again, not just Salt Lake, but Davis, Weber, and Cash, and extremely active in the charities such as Campbell Cares. And I believe those perspectives are critical for going forward. So I know Blake's referenced before that 2025 is going to be the Super Bowl year for financial matters because of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act expanding and the deficits. I fully agree. But if you're going into a Super Bowl year, would you rather have someone that has a career that's been in government-funded roles, or somebody that's a CPA, CFO, MBA that's been active in so many different facets of our community? So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. We're grateful to have had you here today.
Thanks so much for your time. We'll have a few other thank yous. We want to thank our amazing chamber staff. They do such a great job with these candidate forums, and also campaign staffs that have helped with these forums so much. And then we haven't done this yet, but I want to give a shout out to Pixum chamber member here. They are the ones responsible for these broadcasts, and they do a terrific job. And thanks to you that have watched this candidate forum. Have a great rest of your day.
That concludes our District 1 candidate forum, and we'd like to thank both of our candidates for their time and dedication to the people of Utah, and we wish them both the best of luck in the upcoming election.